spectacle. So spectacle is not a new concept. It's been around. Guy Debord developed this primarily critical theorist in the mid-20th century, talking about the role of images and representation that guides the relationship with people. I've been looking at this quite closely in the last few years around the role of these large-scale digital and social platforms, polarized spaces where people are more and more subject to personalized information design and extraction, sensational content, sophisticated advertising techniques. And so where I think this, these should all not be, this is my most creative slide of the evening. You'll see if I'm the part, that these, and I think it's not, this used to be, I don't think it's a surprise to us anymore that we've seen research over and over again now to substantiate the design, the inherent design within these platforms and networks, that they are focused on, as you said, they're focused on the extraction of data, they're focused on the continuing use, the sharing and repurposing of expression. Their currency is our time, their currency is our effort. And we've kind of hit this tipping point where what they've realized is the type of content and behaviors that keep us engaged in them are things that we just heard from Monica. So content that's more sensational, that's more shareable, that's more personable, that has these redeeming values. And it's not, and they've designed it this way. And my argument around this is that these platforms have done exactly what they should do in the marketplace of like commodified systems, and that our news and our civic and public institutions have opted into these because they're so good at gathering the human attention of their users. And so what we have seen is this conflation of, this is kind of one example that leads it off, but there are more. What they've bred is a space where when people figure out their design, like early examples from David talking about like the young Macedonian entrepreneurs that learn how to manipulate the system to achieve commercial ends. And when news organizations and civic organizations play in that role, you get someone like our friend Pepe the Frog, who becomes co-opted by alternative groups that know how to use these platforms that do not distinguish between real news and other forms of news. At least they didn't have that effort, 2, 3, 4 years ago when this all started. And then you see mainstream politicians who also co-opt these, right? But what's more interesting now is not simply this example, but two recent pieces that have been out in the last few days, one by Arthur Brooks. He wrote, "The contemporary society does not have a problem with civility," which I don't agree with. It does, but he thinks the problem is rather a problem with contempt. And he says that the design of these systems are not just breeding like general incivilities; they're breeding contempt for the other, because he says contempt makes political compromise and progress impossible. It also makes us unhappy as people. So if deep inside we're all unhappy, we can blame it on these technologies. So I think this is really compelling to me, that we think about civility in this notion of contempt. And in our platforms that are designed for continual engagement and distraction and sensational and spectacular content, asking people to continually move through them, share them, express, respond, these kind of rigors of the human condition, liking, feeling good about ourselves, they create contempt. So the next set of examples around spectacle, this is in the US, this is now, I don't know how many months ago for those who remember it. This was on the Nation, the Capitol, in front of the Capitol. It was a group from Kentucky and a Native American group protesting for their rights that clashed, and it was caught on camera and shared. Now, the interesting thing is that these platforms, when they ask users and they put them in peer groups, self-supported peer groups, to advocate for these, the users take control. And normally, as we've all seen anecdotally, contempt is what comes out of that. Same thing here. This was in the US Supreme Court hearing, if no one remembers. I'm based in Boston. I didn't introduce myself. It's completely rude of me. But I am based in Boston, so these examples come from my perspective. This is Brett Kavanaugh, who was a recently elected US Supreme Court Justice, and his hearing with the one who accused him of sexual assault some 30 to 40 years ago. It's not that this issue, it's that when this issue gets co-opted into these platforms that prioritize spectacle, what you have emerging is this culture of people sharing in like-minded networks, ideas, opinions, inferences, and they get conflated in our news cycle. Mainstream media, as David said, is just as complicit in this because they know in this privatized system that to find more eyeballs and more connection with their users, they have to opt into these spaces as well. So they're just as complicit in sharing and spreading some of this news. This is the caravan, the migrant caravan that started out in Central and South America, another space where contempt breeds, right? So the spectacle argue ends with Wael Ghonim, who is one of the kind of anonymous Facebook founders in the MENA uprisings in the Arab Spring. He recently had a talk where he put together a series of kind of generalities that I think map nicely with spectacle. We don't know how to deal with rumors. We tend to only communicate with people that we agree with. Online discussions quickly descend into angry mobs. We're forced to jump to conclusions. And our digital experiences favor broadcasting over engagement, posts over discussions, and shallow commitments over deep interactions. And he's talking about like our online realities. And so basically I'm arguing that the first problem is one of these platforms that prioritize us being with people that are like-minded, that share values and views, beliefs. We feel justified in peer validation of what we share or in validating peers and getting that feedback. Again, that's part of the human